the Ruth Miskin training for parents today, and Ruth Miskin is basically the lady who developed the scheme that we use to teach your children to read, which is called Read, Write, Ink. So it teaches them to read, but it also then goes beyond to actually introduce how to write in sentences as well. So it's a kind of whole literacy package that we use. Now, the government are quite flexible in a lot of the things that they tell teachers to do and how to do it. But one of the things that they are very, very certain on, and it's backed by a lot of research, is that the absolute best way for a child to learn to read is using phonics. So phonics is very much here to stay. There was a big report quite a few years back now called the Rose Report that clarified that, and phonics has been the kind of buzz thing for a good few years in education. But for a lot of us, it is definitely not the way we learn to read at school. I know when I learnt to read, it was very much like it was just sort of supposed to happen by immersion. As long as you read lots of good books, it was all going to be okay. Phonics is kind of the opposite to that. It is very prescriptive. You are literally taught every little building block of every little word, then you learn to stick them together. And that's the best way to think of phonics. So we're going to go through this presentation together, and we'll learn a few bits and bobs along the way that will help you to support your children as they start their phonics journey. So first and foremost, it's just to sort of say how important reading is. I won't read that quote to you, but we do know that of all the kind of school behaviours and things that children can engage in at school, reading is the biggest predictor for long-term success, for lifetime happiness, for mental health outcomes, for employment outcomes. Reading is so, so important. It's kind of like, think of it as the key to everything else, because actually if your child doesn't learn to read, they might not be able to read the questions they need to complete in maths. They won't be able to read the history that they need to learn about in history. So actually, it's sort of like the foundation for any other sort of learning. So reading genuinely is the most important thing that your child will learn in the next few years with us. So we give it a huge level of importance. Leave that one there. So, to help us to teach your children to read, we use the scheme Read, Write, Ink, as I've mentioned, and you will become very familiar with these resources as they come through to your child. Normally they stop around year 2, but one thing to be really clear about today is that every child's brain is different and every brain learns to read at a different rate. Just like all of us would take a different length of time to learn a very complex dance routine, reading is probably more complex than any other dance routine in the world. And some people will just pick it up like that and you'll think, I'm sure I did not teach them that, but yet they know it already. And other children, you will feel you might have taught them the same thing many, many, many times and it still hasn't gone in. And that is fine, because every brain is different and every brain will learn in a different way. So we take it at your child's pace. There is no pressure for them to be learning at a particular pace. We adapt the teaching to match where they are. So I'm just going to show you a little bit about how we actually teach a daily phonics lesson. So each day your child will be introduced to one sound. Now they start pretty simple. So at the moment we're looking at just the alphabet sounds, so the sounds that are on their own. So it's really lovely because every sound also has its own little picture and its own mnemonic. So this is Maisie, and we say Maisie, mountain, mountain. So they will learn which is the sound. They won't say M and they won't say M. They will say And in a minute, I'm going to show you a video of how we pronounce all the sounds. But one really easy trick to make sure you're saying your sounds right is, rather than thinking of yourself saying them in a hard way, M, D, E, you're D, E. So if you pronounce them like that, it will help your child not only to read them, but also when they go on to write, if you think you're writing the word dog and you think the sound D is D, you're going to spell it D-U because you hear D. But if you can say D, 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 they're just going to hear that sound D. So it helps them to read and it also helps them to write. So we call that using pure sounds. So if you hear us say, oh, they're really good at their pure sounds, you'll know what we mean. So it's just that nice, soft, gentle way of pronouncing your sounds. So with this, we'd be saying but we'd also be saying Maisie, mountain, mountain. Now, the clever thing about that is not only is the child getting a visual to help them remember, oh, when I see that shape, I'm going to say they're also getting a visual to remind them how to write it. Because when they go on to learn to write it, they're saying down Maisie and over the mountains. So every letter has its own special rhyme to remember the shape. Now, when they come home with their little reading pack, which I'm going to tell you, you get a little crib sheet to remind you. So don't worry, you don't have to remember them all, because it's quite a lot to remember, isn't it? So you've got a crib sheet coming, so don't worry, you don't need to remember them all at once. So each day we have one sound. So that's how it builds up. Now, then, once we've introduced a sound, we look at words with the sounds in them. So we look at what we call green words. Now, green words are words that follow all the rules of phonics. So, for example, a green word would be at, mat. If they know those sounds, they can read it. There's nothing that's going to trick them up. Now, because we all can read English, we know that there are lots of words that don't follow the rules. So I'll talk to you about those later. But to start with, we keep it very simple. They learn the sounds, they learn the words that follow the rules of that sound. And then they get to practice what they've learned by reading in little books. So that is the kind of process that they get. So they get the sound on its own, they get the green words with the sounds in it, then those words go into books. So that's your kind of process each day. So in phonics, we assess your children every 6 weeks, and then they are grouped based on which sounds they know and which sounds they don't know. So it's a really good way of making sure that we are teaching exactly where the gaps are, because as I said, every child's brain is different. Every child is going to learn at a different pace. One child might have heard that sound once and whiz and know it. Another child might need to revisit it. So we are constantly checking and rechecking. Now, at the moment, all of your children in reception are only with their class teacher because they're still settling, and we actually haven't had them in for 6 weeks yet to assess them. Once they've been with us for 6 weeks, we will assess which sounds they all know. And at that point, it might be that we have a group with Mrs. Bausch, a group with Mrs. Humphreys, and a group with Mrs. Hill. So they're in nice small groups, and this happens every day. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about the different types of sounds. So we said that we're going to think of phonics as like Lego bricks, and each little brick is a different unit of sound. But as we all know as well, English is a very complicated language, and there are lots of different sorts of sounds. So in the first word there, we have got single letter sounds, ah, and t. So each sound is on its own, and that's fine. However, then we come along to what we call digraphs. So a digraph is a 2-letter sound. So we do a lot of work with the children saying they're special friends. So they live together, they are special friends. We don't say yeah, we say a. So just like when they were learning letters, we would show them this and we would say a, but now they're not learning to write it because they've already learned to write an a and they've already learned to write a yeah. They're learning to remember that this sound makes these 2 letters together, this special friend makes a specific sound. So we would say a, may I play? The children are together and they want to play together. May I play? A, may I play? A, may I play? So it's a little rhyme to really cement that link between whenever they see that sound, they're going to say, A, may I play? And it really does work, because when you're reading with them, they might be reading the word, I don't know, stay. So they've got this and they've got the t. They get to that bit and you just say, may I play? And they go, oh, A, stay. So it's a little memory jogger for them. And there are lots and lots of these different sounds, which we're going to see in a minute. So they are digraphs, 2 letters, 1 sound. Now, I told you it gets complicated. By the way, they don't think this is complicated. Like, when we're saying digraph to them, they don't know that's a difficult word. So we never dumb it down for them. We don't say, oh, you know, you won't manage this word. We call them digraphs with the children. We call them special friends as well, but we call them digraphs too. And they don't know that's difficult. So we've also got trigraphs. So that's just 3 letters making 1 sound. So this is the first trigraph that they will learn, and it's actually not that long that they learn this one, is it? It's quite soon. And this is I, fly high. I, fly high. So they will learn that, and then they will learn words like light, night, bright, sight, all have that trigraph in them. And they are also special friends because they live together and they make 1 sound. So that's just some of the terminology you might hear them saying. You might hear them say digraph, you might hear them say trigraph, and you might hear them say special friends. So they're all quite important words for you just to not be scared of. And just if you forget what they mean, get the children to tell you because they'll know. So it gets even more confusing, I guess, for us in terms of if you think in English, there isn't always just one way to make each sound. So, for example, the children will learn the sound E, as in the word see or bumblebee, and they'll learn that that's two letter E's next to each other. But then they will also learn the grapheme EA, as in cup of tea or the ocean, the sea. So they will learn that there are the same sounds but made by different letters. And that's what we call graphemes, where there are different ways of making the same sounds but with different letters. So that's another word that they're going to get their heads around. But again, they will teach you. And once they've cracked all that code, they can blend those sounds together to pretty much read any word. There are obviously exceptions, and we'll talk about that, but it's a very good starting point for them. So like I said, it's a complicated code. So we know we've only got 44 actual different sounds and 26 letters, but in combination, we've got 150 different graphemes. So although those sounds are only 44 different sounds, we can spell them all those different ways. So it is complicated for them, and that is why phonics has been shown to be the best code for us to teach them. So these are the first sounds that they learn. So you can see it starts quite simple, and then they get on to quite a few of the digraphs quite quickly. So sh and s and ng and ink and ch and qua. And we've got some words that we use with them there. We call some sounds stretchy. So when we introduce a sound, we might say, oh, this is a stretchy sound because you can make it long. So you go, But we also call some sounds bouncy, da, 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 because they are shorter. So I'm going to play you a little video now, and I think this girl is 4, and she is going to tell you how to say all the sounds. So let's see if when we hear her say it, we might feel a bit clearer about all the sounds that they're going to be learning.
These are the stretchy sounds. Oh. These are the soft sounds.
So you can see how she was using that pure sound we were talking about. And some of them do sound a bit different to, I know a lot of us would say the letter L, we'd say it's a L, but we pronounce it all in phonics because that will help them actually sound out the words more clearly. So there are some of them where they might come home and say, we learnt a new sound today, and this is how you say it, like X. We teach them almost like a kiss, kiss, kiss kind of sound. So you might say, oh, that's a bit funny, but it's just so that they can blend words together better. So I've used the word blending a couple of times now. These are more advanced sounds. They will get onto these, but don't worry too much about them because we will send home sheets with them all explained. But that's just to show you how far they go, and there are a lot of sounds. Anyway, so I've used the word blending quite a lot, and we use this little frog up here called Fred. So Fred is supposed to be a frog who doesn't know how to blend sounds together. And to be able to read, the idea is that you would blend sounds together. So let's imagine we're all in a phonics lesson and we've learned the trigraph I, the special friends I, and they know fly high is I, fly high is I. And now we are going to read some green words with that sound in it. So the first thing the teacher would say is special friends. Now, that is reminding the children, you've just learnt this sound, can you see it in the word? And it's got a line under it, so straight away their eye is going to go to that line, hopefully, and they're going to remember, oh yeah, we've just learnt that that's I. So when you're reading words with children at home, that's a really good tip to use, if they're stuck especially, is to say special friends, and if they can't find it, you can find it for them and say, oh look, there's the special friend. Then you're going to say, we are going to Fred talk. Now, Fred talk is when we say the sounds separately, because Fred can't blend. We sometimes say he's a bit rubbish because he can't blend, and you can, you're better. So we say, right, Fred talk. I, t. And then we say read the word, might. Now, it's only at the end when we say read the word, they're actually blending those sounds together. But reading has got those 3 different steps. First, you've got to be able to identify what the sounds are. Then you've got to be able to segment a word into its individual sounds. Then you've got to stick them together. Now, that sounds complicated, but actually, when every time they're presented with a word, we say special friends, and sometimes they'll say no special friends. If it was the word cat, no, there aren't any special friends in that. Then you say Fred talk, I, t. Read the word, might. So if you can remember that little phrase, Fred talk, special friends, Fred talk, read the word, that will really help them to blend. Now, the other thing is, it's not supposed to be some kind of horrible, stressful exam for them. So when the children first start to bring things home, if they are not able to blend, then you do it for them. That is absolutely fine. If they aren't able to hear it after a few times of you saying, oh, special friend, I, just tell them it's might. There's no worry with that. The more they hear you modelling it, the more they will learn how to do that process. So, the next thing that we can do with Fred is, as well as actually helping us to read, he can help us to write. So if you're with your child and they want to write the word cat, you can say, oh, let's see how many Fred fingers that's got. Cat. K-a-t. Squeeze your sounds. So if they hear you say that, squeeze your sounds, we say that at school a lot, K-a-t, it's also helping them to write. So it's a 2-way thing, it's reading and writing. So Fred's really helpful for lots of things. Right, so very, very soon, your children are going to bring home their first reading books. Now, the first ones they're going to bring home are going to look like this. So they're little blending books. Now then, they are not the most exciting read that you will ever have encountered. Okay, so your job here is to fake it, because this is the most exciting book you have ever seen. This is amazing. This is their first ever reading book, and you can read it. This is amazing, okay? The other thing to know about Read, Write, Ink and learning to read with phonics is it is repetitive, and that is intentional. So your phrase that you are banned from saying as a parent is, oh, you've had this book, because yes, they have, and that's the point. Repetition is so important. So you might be bored to tears of this book, but you are not going to tell them that, because it is still very exciting. The other phrase that is banned is, this book is too easy for you. Your job at home is to give them that space to be the expert. Look, you can read this book all on your own. This is brilliant. Of course, if they can't, you step in and you help. But if they can read it, that's brilliant. That's not this is too easy for you, I need to get you a harder book. The whole point of home reading is to give them that practice where they are the expert and they can nail it. You want them to nail it. So that whole thing, they call it past and last. So they should be reading books that they have just got past, and the last book and some past books from the past. So if you get a book that they've already had, that's good. That means that they are practicing and they are building familiarity. So please don't worry about that. It is designed to be a repetitive scheme. They actually cannot bring a book home with our scheme until they've read it at least 3 times at school, because they want to come home with familiarity. I know I've overrun a little bit, but please don't worry. The teachers will look after your children. So don't worry, we will be finishing up quite soon. I just wanted to then explain that, remember I said we then assess them and they are grouped. Now, some of the different levels in the scheme have books that look a bit different. So one thing that we don't really like as teachers, to be honest, of this scheme is that there is one level quite early on where they'll have started off on these cute little purple books, and then suddenly, for about 10 books, they come home with these, which are a sheet. Now we do a lot of PR with the kids at school and say, it's just as important as a book. We bring it in a plastic wallet. This is still your reading book. So if they get a sheet, again, you're going to have to help us out a bit, do a bit of faking. Oh, you've got one of those brilliant sheets. Great. Not, oh, you haven't got a book this week. Oh, this is rubbish. This is all creased now in your bag. No, this is just as good. And it is just a really nice, simple story on one page. Why they do that, we don't know. We're still trying to get to the bottom of it. But after that, then they're back on books. So this is the next level of books. Also, some of the books look like this. Don't worry, they are all the same. Now, the nice thing about Ruth Miskin Read Write Ink books is that they start off with a refresher of the sounds that the child should know. The ones in the circles are the ones that they want you to really spend a bit more time on looking at. And then they start also remind you some of the words. And that's just a really good way to get them to feel confident before they start reading the actual book. They can read the words. Now, the last thing I'm going to tell you about just before you go is those words that don't follow the rules. Okay, so obviously in English there are quite a lot of words that don't follow the rules. If we were going to use phonics to read the word said, it would say sa, a, I, da. If we were going to use phonics to read the word I, it would say I. So these are what we call red words. Now we teach the children effectively to memorize these words. And we do something slightly embarrassing called red rhythms, where we basically sort of chant them in a funny rhythm. So we'll be like S-A-I-D, S-A-I-D. So that's the kind of thing we would do. They are going to just memorize those words. So in the books, if there is a red word, it is actually printed in red. So you can say to them, uh-oh, red word, we know what to do here, or you can just tell them how to read that word and just say it a few times over to embed it. Now, the last thing that I just wanted to share with you before you go is what you can do. So we've talked about using those pure sounds, not having any uhs on the end, so no huh, no duh, it's all got to be duh, really soft. We've talked about using Fred, so you can remember that phrase, special friends, Fred talk, read the word. We've talked about how it is going to be repetitive, and the best thing you can do is hear them every day. Now, we are realistic at this school. We're all parents as well. We know life gets in the way. So our big aim is 5 out of 7 days. If you can do that, and it can just be for 5 minutes, that's fine. Now, some days they're just not in the mood. That's absolutely fine. If you really think they're not in the mood at all, just leave it. If they maybe do a little bit, you can just sound spot that day. I know, let's go through and find all the ch in this book. I know, let's go through and find all the red words in this book. You don't have to religiously pull your way through the whole book every time. And then the really, really important bit is, as I said, they are not the most inspiring books. Your job as the adults is to still give them that variety of those books that they are nowhere near being able to read yet, but you can read them to them. So all your Julia Donaldsons, all those magical stories that are, you know, the picture books. We have a library here they can borrow from. There's a really good library in Nap Hill. There's a bigger one in Woking. There are so many ways to get free books. You don't need to buy them at all. But the more you can share with them and talk about those books, oh, that's funny. Why did that man do that in that story? Oh, that's a bit like when we went to the park and had the same experience. So linking it back to their world, they are the most important things you can do. Talking about books is just as important as reading books. So I hope I've given you a bit of a toolbox to go away with. I'm going to send out on Dojo a sort of crib sheet of everything I've said, and I will also share the PowerPoint that we've used. Just to say about Dojo, you should have all got an email today which will allow you to link up to your family so that you can start accessing Dojo. And Mrs. Bausch and Mrs. Humphreys and Miss M will be sharing the Monday memo, which is your little overview of the week every week on Dojo. So look out for that email. And just also to say that if you want to message about something which is more than a little kind of admin, like, oh, I've lost a jumper, is it PE tomorrow? Then it's better to use email for the longer, more important things. SLT do have access to Dojo, so myself and Mrs. McConnell do have access to Dojo, but if you wanted to speak to us about something, email is a more reliable way to get in contact. So I've made you all very late. I'm sure Mrs.